Act 1. Colombia, May 1989. Anna was 18 years old, and Jorge was 19 when their shared journey began to change forever. As the days passed, their dreams of a happy life seemed more and more distant. They had run away from their homes, trying to escape the system that limited them, so they could live life on their own terms. In their eyes, there was only one goal: to create a new, better reality, far away from everything that had hurt them. The young couple thought their decision to leave their villages was the start of something new. Anna dreamed of a future full of love and happiness, while Jorge simply wanted peace, the peace he had never known. Anna and Jorge met when they were both already exhausted from the brutal reality imposed on them. She came from a poor family where life offered no respite. Her father was absent, and her mother was forced to work hard to support the family. In their home, there was neither room for love nor for dreams. Tall, with dark eyes hiding deep sorrow, Anna was like an empty space waiting to be filled. It was in this emptiness that she met Jorge. Jorge, though only a few months younger, exuded the same yearning for freedom from the very start. His home was just as difficult. His father drank, and his mother remained silent, too tired from the daily pain to intervene in his life. Raised in the warmth of a family hell, he saw no other way than to leave everything he had known. They decided to run away together, not thinking about the consequences. It was a decision they didn't fully understand, but they both knew one thing: they couldn't stay where they were. They had to find their own path. The escape gave them a sense of freedom, although that freedom quickly turned out to be more of an illusion than a reality. In the small apartment they rented in one of Bogotá's poorer districts, their life began to take shape. Lack of money, job struggles, uncertainty about tomorrow. All these elements seemed to overwhelm their everyday life. At first, when everything was new, their relationship seemed perfect. They loved each other. Even though life didn't offer many reasons for joy, they had each other, and that was enough. Anna was full of hope. Her deepest desire was to start a family, although day by day she began to notice something was wrong with their plans. They still couldn't have children. After several months of moving in, sleepless nights, and endless attempts, they felt something in their bodies wasn't working the way it should. Anna couldn't find the strength to accept this reality. Her eyes were full of questions that had no answers. "Why can't we have children?" she asked every day, even though Jorge tried to comfort her, saying it wasn't their fault and that everything would be fine. But her thoughts revolved around that one thing. Sometimes, when he looked at her, he saw something in her eyes that he hadn't noticed before: unease. It wasn't just ordinary fear, but a deep despair he couldn't understand. Anna was changing before his eyes. Day by day, her attitude became rougher, full of bitterness. Even small situations began to lead to violent reactions. And then, more and more often, Anna turned into someone who could no longer be gentle with him. The deep sadness in her eyes became something more dangerous. Quiet accusations appeared. "It's your fault we don't have children." She stopped hiding her anger. She started to explode, unable to control her emotions. Jorge tried to comfort her. He wanted to believe that they would still have a chance at a happy future. But the more he tried, the more he felt she was becoming distant from him. He couldn't fit into this new reality he didn't understand. Soon he realized that Anna was not only pushing him away, but also putting him in a state of anxiety that was becoming harder to endure. Though she didn't say it out loud, he began to understand that Anna wanted more, to control him, to dominate him in a way he hadn't predicted. At first, it was small things, her changing moods, the fact that she stopped talking to him about their future. She stopped asking about how his day had been. Everything became indifferent. Then came the small threats. First, whispered threats, then louder words that made him feel like a slave. "You won't leave this apartment unless you do what I want," she said with cold precision. And he, though he tried to resist, knew he couldn't oppose her. The more he tried to fight back, the more he realized that Anna was becoming someone who was no longer the girl he had fallen in love with. She was someone who held their entire future in her hands, only hers. He felt it in the air, the tension that hung over them like a storm that was about to arrive. He had no idea what would happen next. And Anna, though full of sadness, was also mysterious in her strength. He didn't understand her, and it was this uncertainty which began to seep into him that became his greatest nightmare. Act 2. At first, he didn't notice anything. The exhaustion of daily life, the constant struggle to survive in a new place. Everything explained the small changes that had started appearing between them. Anna didn't start yelling right away. She didn't forbid him from going out from the first day. She did it subtly. She wove her dissatisfaction into everyday conversations, making Jorge start adjusting to her expectations on his own. "Why are you wearing that shirt again?" she asked without looking at him. He didn't know what to say. "Why are you eating so much?" she asked another day as he was serving himself dinner. "Leave some. We can't waste food." He ate less. "Are you going out?" she would ask, her gaze growing sterner. "Why? With whom? For how long?" Every answer seemed wrong. If he said he was going to work, she complained that they didn't spend enough time together. If he said he would stay home, she accused him of being lazy. Every decision led to an argument. She started repeating that she didn't need anyone but him. He didn't know when exactly he began to feel like a prisoner in his own life. One day, the food tasted different. He couldn't pinpoint why, but he felt that something was off. Maybe it was the spices, maybe just a bad day. He didn't ask. "Anna, did you add something new to the meal?" She looked at him blankly. "Maybe you're just imagining things." The next day, he felt a strange sense of numbness. It seemed like everything around him was slightly blurred, as if someone had placed a transparent layer of fog over the world. A few days later, he noticed something else. Sometimes, when he was alone in a room, he had the feeling that he wasn't really alone. The shadows in the corners seemed to flicker, as if something was there. He tried to focus. It's just exhaustion. One night, he woke up drenched in sweat. He wasn't alone. In the corner of the room stood a figure. It had no face, but he could feel its gaze. He blinked. He was alone. He heard a whisper. He turned sharply, but Anna was sleeping peacefully beside him. It was a dream. It had to be. "I saw someone in the apartment," he said the next day. She looked at him carefully, like a doctor observing a psychiatric patient. "Maybe you're overthinking things," she said with a smile. "Maybe. You just need to rest." He used to trust his own thoughts. Now he wasn't so sure. One evening, Anna sat beside him, stroking his hair. "Jorge, you did something very bad," he frowned. "What do you mean?" She leaned in and whispered in his ear. "Don't you remember?" He felt his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't remember. But if she was telling the truth, if he had done something, he didn't sleep that night. He wasn't sure who he was anymore. A few days later, an argument started over nothing. Anna looked at him with wild fury. "Look at me when I'm talking to you." He felt the blow, a sharp pain on his cheek. He opened his mouth, but before he could say anything, Anna did something strange. Her rage disappeared as if someone had flipped a switch. She looked at him with terror. "Look at what you did to me," she whispered. He didn't understand. "But you hit me." But looking at her face, he started to wonder. Maybe he had started it. Maybe... "I'm sorry," he said finally. She didn't respond. He didn't know when she had started locking him in there. At first, she said it was just for a little while. Then, a bit longer, for safety. When he resisted, she began saying stranger and stranger things. "Jorge, you don't know what you're doing." The shackles on his wrists were loose, but with each passing day he had less and less freedom. The noose around his neck, which he hadn't noticed at first, was beginning to tighten. Sometimes she gave him food, but less and less often. She left him in darkness. Other times she left the light on just long enough for his imagination to start working. In the dimness he saw shadows moving across the walls. Sometimes he felt like something was there with him. A whisper, hands brushing against his neck, laughter in the distance. He started talking to himself to keep from going insane. Then came the night when he felt he had a chance. Anna came to him in a different mood. She brought more food. "Maybe I'll let you go," she said quietly. His heart started beating faster. He had to act. When she fell asleep, he reached for a piece of metal he had found under the pipe. He started sawing at the shackles. It took him the entire night. When the sun rose, he was free. He opened the door. He stepped out of the apartment. He ran as fast as he could, the street, people, and then he saw her. She stood there looking at him. She didn't seem angry. She knew he would come back, and then something changed. He didn't know how it happened, but suddenly he was back in the basement. Had he really escaped? Or was it a hallucination? Anna looked at him with a smile. "I told you," she whispered. "You can't leave me." He no longer knew what was real and what was just another illusion. Had any of this really happened? Had a world outside this basement ever truly existed? Act 3. Jorge didn't remember the last time he truly slept. He wasn't sure how many days had passed since he ended up in the basement. Maybe a week, maybe a month, maybe an entire lifetime. He was exhausted. His body trembled from the cold, and his stomach clung to his spine from hunger. Anna rarely brought food, and when she did, she left it just beyond his reach. "You should try harder, Jorge," she said one day, sitting on the basement stairs. She held a bowl of soup in her hands. Hot steam lazily rose into the air. "Do you want this?" Jorge nodded. He didn't have the strength to speak. Anna smiled slightly and carefully placed the bowl on the floor, but just a few inches out of his reach. "Go on," she encouraged him. "Just reach for it." Jorge tensed his muscles, tried to lift himself, but the chain tightened around his neck. He coughed, nearly choking on his own saliva. "No?" Anna sighed. "And here I thought you were trying." She picked up the bowl and, smiling, poured the contents onto the dirty floor. Jorge could only watch as the food seeped into the concrete. Sometimes Anna came down to the basement and talked to him as if nothing had happened, as if they were still husband and wife, as if she hadn't chained him to a pipe, as if everything was perfectly fine. "You've changed, Jorge," she said one day, staring at him. "You're not yourself anymore." "Anna," his voice was barely a whisper. "No." She shook her head. "This isn't you." He looked at her, trying to understand. "You're not my Jorge," she whispered. "My Jorge wouldn't leave me." Something in her voice terrified him. Something in the way she looked at him, as if she wasn't seeing a person, but something else. Then the visions started. At first, he thought they were just dreams. Then he realized he didn't know when he was dreaming and when he wasn't. Sometimes he saw shadows in the corner that moved, even though there was nothing there. Sometimes he heard whispers, voices telling him things he didn't want to hear. "This is your fault. You'll never escape. Jorge, you're already dead." One night, something woke him. His body was exhausted, but he felt the skin on his neck tighten. In the darkness, he saw Anna's silhouette. She was standing over him, holding a pot. He didn't have time to react. A searing pain exploded on his skin as boiling water poured over his chest. Jorge screamed, but Anna only looked at him indifferently. "Get up," she said. His skin burned like fire, but Anna grabbed his hair and lifted his head. "Stop whining," she hissed. "See? You're just like a rat." living in darkness, waiting for someone to throw you scraps. Jorge breathed shallowly, trying not to vomit. Ana smiled slightly. But you know what? Rats die eventually. Jorge didn't know how much time had passed. Every second stretched into eternity. Sometimes Ana spoke to him like a husband. Sometimes she treated him like a stranger. And sometimes, in the worst moments, she looked at him as if he wasn't there at all. "Why aren't you eating?" she asked one day. Jorge looked up. "You didn't leave me any food," he muttered. Ana smiled gently. "Of course I did." "No, it's right here." She pointed to the empty floor. Jorge stared at her, trying to understand. "Why won't you eat?" she asked, leaning closer. Her voice was full of concern. "You have to eat, Jorge." He didn't answer. "Maybe you're not hungry because—" Her eyes gleamed in the shadows. "Because you're already dead?" Jorge felt something twist inside him. "What? What did you say?" Ana smiled wide. "Jorge," she whispered, "you've been dead for a long time." He thought he was dreaming. He felt the chain tightening around his neck. He felt the world around him falling apart. Was Ana right? Was he really dead? Number, it couldn't be true, right? That day, he made a decision. He had had enough. When Ana came into the basement, he was waiting in silence. She closed the door. She held a cup of water in her hand. Gathering the last of his strength, he lunged at her and struck. Ana fell to the floor, and the cup shattered on the concrete. The chain pulled him back, but Jorge didn't stop. He strangled her, hard, harder, until her body stopped moving. He breathed heavily. It was over. It was finally over. He looked at his hands. They were red. He started laughing. He stood up, took a step, and then he saw Ana. She was standing by the door, looking at him. Her head was tilted to the side, and her eyes gleamed in the darkness. "What are you doing, Jorge?" she asked gently. He froze. He looked at the floor. There was no body. He looked at his hands. They were clean. Had it really happened? Or was it just another vision? His heart pounded in his chest. Ana smiled softly. "Well, well," she whispered. "Maybe you really are already dead." Jorge woke up in darkness. He felt the chain tightening around his neck. He didn't know what was real. He didn't know if he would ever get out. He looked towards the door. They were open. They had been open the whole time. But Jorge no longer had the strength to stand up. The line between reality and madness is thin. Sometimes we don't even notice when we cross it. Talk to you soon.